He was just another forgotten boy under the city bridge, cold, hungry, invisible. No name, no family, no future. Just another shadow the world had stopped caring about. But that night, as the wind howled through the empty streets, fate placed a trembling little girl in his path, a child crying for her father, lost and alone in the dark. He could have walked away, but instead, he gave her the only thing he had left: warmth, courage, and his last piece of bread. He didn't know that the girl's father was the most powerful man in the city, a billionaire who had lost faith in people long ago. And when that man finally found his daughter safe in the arms of a homeless teen, the story that would follow would break hearts, test loyalty, and prove that the richest souls are not always the ones with money. Because sometimes, it takes someone with nothing to remind the world what humanity still means. He had nothing, but one act of kindness turned a street boy into the heart of a billionaire's world. Would you still help someone if you knew you'd get nothing in return, not even a thank you? If this story moved something in you, subscribe now to the Billionaire's Enclave, where real emotions, impossible odds, and life-changing kindness come alive in every story. Rain poured through the cracks of the city that night, a slow, merciless drizzle that blurred the lights and washed away what was left of warmth. Under a forgotten bridge, where the hum of traffic was nothing but a distant lullaby, a boy wrapped himself in torn cardboard and thin hope. Mark Gold, 17, stared at the gray concrete above him. It was cracked, ugly, and yet familiar, the only ceiling he'd known for 2 years. Around him were fragments of survival, an old backpack, a half-broken lighter, and a loaf of bread so stale it could break a tooth. He tore it in half, looked at it for a moment, then sighed. A small whimper made him glance toward the corner, a thin, wet dog, ribs showing, eyes wide. Mark smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know that look," he murmured. He broke the bread again and tossed the bigger piece toward the dog. "Guess we're both starving, huh?" The animal sniffed it, wagged its tail weakly, and ate. Mark leaned back, watching the city lights reflected in puddles like distant dreams. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself, "I'll find something better." But tomorrow always came with the same hunger. His life had been a series of escapes, from a foster home that bruised more than it fed him, from people who saw him as a mistake instead of a boy, from promises that never lasted. And yet, there was still something inside him that refused to die. A small flicker of kindness he couldn't extinguish, no matter how much the world tried to. The night deepened. Wind howled through the bridge. Then, a sound. At first, he thought it was just the echo of traffic, but then he heard it again. A child's cry. Mark froze. It came from beyond the bridge, soft but panicked, the kind of cry that wasn't meant to be alone. He stood, pulling his thin jacket closer, and followed the sound through the rain. There, at the corner of the empty street, stood a little girl, maybe 10, clutching a soaked teddy bear to her chest. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her shoes were muddy, and her eyes darted around, terrified. Mark's heart clenched. He'd seen fear before, his own reflection had worn it too many times. But this was different. This was innocence left out in the cold. He approached slowly, careful not to scare her. Hey, it's okay. What's your name?" She looked up, trembling. Amanda." "All right, Amanda." He crouched to her level, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Mark. Where's your mom or dad?" Her lip quivered. I don't know. I was waiting in the car, and when I woke up, they were gone." Mark frowned. The street was empty. No cars, no adults. Just a lost little girl in the middle of the storm. "Okay," he said softly, taking off his jacket and wrapping it around her. "You're freezing. Come on, we'll figure it out." Amanda clung to her teddy bear, her small hands shaking. "Are you gonna hurt me?" she whispered. Mark shook his head quickly. "No, kid. Never." He smiled faintly. "I don't even have the money to buy trouble." That made her giggle, a tiny nervous sound, but enough to melt the chill for a moment. He looked around. Every shop was closed, every light dim. The only shelter nearby was his bridge, cold but dry. "Come on, let's get out of the rain," he said, leading her toward it. They walked through puddles, her small steps splashing beside his. When a car sped past, the tires threw a wave of muddy water over both of them. Amanda gasped, then suddenly laughed. A real laugh. Bright. Uncontrolled. Mark blinked at her, half shocked, half amused. You think that's funny? She nodded through giggles. You look like a wet pancake. Mark couldn't help it, he laughed too. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't feel out of place. All right, Miss Pancake Inspector, let's get you somewhere warm before we both catch pneumonia. Back under the bridge, he cleared a dry corner, spreading out the cardboard and old blankets. Amanda looked around, clutching her teddy tighter. It's not much, he said, watching her face, but it's safe. She nodded slowly. Thank you. He found half a sandwich he'd been saving and offered it to her. Here. Eat. But what about you? I already ate, he lied, smiling. Amanda bit into it and sighed contentedly. Mark sat nearby, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Don't worry, he said quietly. We'll find your dad in the morning. I promise. Amanda looked up at him, her eyes glimmering in the firelight from a flickering lighter. You promise? Mark nodded. Yeah. Cross my heart. Outside, the city buzzed. People sleeping in soft beds, unaware of the boy under the bridge who had just saved a stranger's world. For the first time in years, Mark didn't feel invisible. Because in that small, soaked child's eyes, he saw something he'd forgotten existed: trust. As the night deepened, Amanda curled up beside him, clutching her teddy. Mark draped his threadbare blanket over her shoulders. He watched her breathe softly, peaceful now, and whispered to himself, You're safe now, kid. You're safe. He leaned back against the wall, eyes heavy, but heart strangely full. The rain outside softened to a drizzle. Somewhere far above, life continued. People dining, sleeping, dreaming. But under the bridge, a different kind of story had begun. A story born not of wealth or fate, but of one boy's decision to care when he had nothing left to give. She didn't know who he was, and he didn't care who she belonged to. All he saw was a scared child who needed him. The night deepened, and the city howled like a wounded beast. Rain drummed on the roof of the half-collapsed warehouse as Mark Gold guided the shivering little girl inside. She clung to his sleeve, her tiny hand trembling against his torn jacket. Don't be scared, he said softly, brushing the wet hair from her forehead. We'll be fine here for tonight. He found an old metal barrel and stuffed it with crumpled papers, sparking a small flame with a half-broken lighter he'd stolen months ago, not out of greed but to survive. The orange glow flickered across the concrete walls, painting them in ghostly warmth. Amanda watched wide-eyed, as the fire cracked and danced. Wow, you made a campfire, she whispered, smiling faintly. Something like that, Mark said, trying to sound casual. Every hero needs a base, right? She giggled, the sound breaking through the gloom like sunlight. For a moment, Mark forgot about the hunger biting at his ribs or the cold that had become part of his bones. He tore his sandwich in half, the only food he'd saved from the day, and handed a piece to her. Eat up. Her eyes widened. What about you? I'm not that hungry, he lied. Amanda took a small bite and chewed in silence before murmuring, My daddy says sharing makes us strong. Mark looked away, the firelight catching the sadness in his eyes. Your dad sounds like a smart man. He is, she said proudly. But he's always busy. He works all the time. Mark smiled, but his throat tightened. I used to have someone like that, he said quietly. She worked too hard. She said it was to make things better. But sometimes, life doesn't wait for better. Amanda tilted her head. Is she gone? Mark nodded slowly. Yeah. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was soft, understanding. Two souls from different worlds, both missing someone who made life make sense. When the fire dimmed, Mark took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. But you'll get cold, she protested. I've been colder, he said simply. She smiled, hugging the fabric close. You're like a superhero. He laughed softly. If I am, I'm the broke kind. Amanda nestled beside him, her head against his arm. Then you're my broke superhero, she murmured, her voice fading as sleep claimed her. Mark stared at the flames. The way they flickered reminded him of his own life, fragile, but still burning. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. He began humming an old tune from his childhood, a song his mother used to sing before the world turned cruel. Amanda stirred in her sleep, but didn't wake. And in that quiet warehouse, surrounded by darkness, Mark realized something that startled him. For the first time in forever, someone trusted him. The morning came gray and bitter, light creeping through the broken glass panels like shy hope. Mark gently nudged Amanda awake. She rubbed her eyes and yawned. "Are we going home now?" "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile. "Let's find where you belong." They stepped out into the damp street. Mark's shoes soaked instantly in puddles, but he didn't complain. He kept Amanda close as they followed the main road. Then, a sound. Engines. Voices. A black SUV roared around the corner, followed by two more. Doors slammed. Men in suits rushed out, calling a name. Amanda. Amanda Martins. Amanda's head snapped up. "That's me," she cried, running forward. Mark instinctively grabbed her hand. "Wait, you don't know who they..." But before he could finish, a tall man stepped out of the middle car. His presence silenced the world. Black coat, sharp eyes, the kind of authority that didn't need words. Amanda screamed, "Daddy!" and sprinted to him. Mark froze. Armed guards surrounded him instantly, hands on their holsters. He raised his hands in panic, heart pounding. What had he done wrong? The man, Cold Martins, knelt and lifted his daughter into his arms, holding her tight, relief flooding his face. Then his gaze shifted to Mark. The billionaire's eyes were like ice, studying the filthy boy who dared touch his child. One guard barked, "Sir, should we detain him?" Cold raised a hand. "No. Wait." Mark didn't move. His heart hammered against his chest. The weight of their gazes made him feel smaller than ever, a boy from the gutter standing before a man who owned half the skyline. Amanda turned and shouted, "Daddy. He helped me. He kept me safe." For a moment, time stopped. Cold's expression softened, just slightly. He took one step toward Mark, eyes narrowing with curiosity rather than anger. Mark swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. I just wanted to help her get home." The billionaire nodded slowly. "And you did." The guards exchanged confused glances, but Cold ignored them. He gestured toward one of his men. "Get this boy some clean clothes and food." Mark blinked, unsure he'd heard right. Cold added, his tone unreadable, "No one who protects my daughter should ever go hungry again." Mark stared as the man turned away, still holding Amanda. The SUV doors closed, engines roared, and the convoy pulled off, leaving him speechless in the rain, clutching his torn backpack. He looked down at the muddy street, his breath misting in the cold air. The jacket he'd given her was gone, but for some reason, he felt warmer than he ever had before. He didn't know it yet, but that one night had changed everything. The girl he'd guarded all night was the missing child of one of the richest men in the country. What would you do if the child you saved turned out to be a billionaire's daughter? Sparkle, stay hooked. Subscribe and follow the Billionaire's Enclave for the next emotional twist. True kindness always finds its way home. The engines purred like beasts beneath the morning fog as the convoy came to a stop. The black limousine door opened, and out stepped Cold Martins, the man whose name alone carried power across the city. His polished shoes reflected the wet pavement, his dark overcoat fluttered lightly in the wind. Even the guards straightened when he moved. Mark froze, drenched and exhausted, standing in the shadow of the billionaire's presence. He had seen men like this only on billboards, faces that symbolized wealth, control, and distance. But now, that same face was watching him closely. Amanda clung to her father's neck, sobbing into his shoulder. Cold's hand trembled slightly as he held her, a rare crack in his usual stoic armor. "It's all right, my little one," he whispered, kissing her forehead. Then, turning his gaze back to Mark, his tone shifted, calm but commanding. "Who are you, son?" Mark swallowed, his voice hoarse. "Mark Gold, sir. I just found her alone on the street last night. I couldn't leave her there." Cold's sharp eyes darted to the guards. "And where were you all night while my daughter was sleeping under a bridge?" His voice struck like thunder. The guards lowered their heads in shame. One of them, clearly nervous, stepped forward. "Sir, we didn't know." "Enough," Cold cut him off with quiet authority. He walked toward Mark, each step echoing with power. The boy's instinct screamed to run, but he stood still. His ragged shoes, torn jeans, and hollow eyes painted a portrait of hardship, yet he didn't flinch. Amanda looked between them anxiously. "Daddy, please don't be mad. He helped me. He gave me his jacket." Cold stopped just a few feet away, examining the boy. His tailored suit glimmered faintly under the morning sun, but what caught his attention wasn't the boy's dirt or smell, it was his calmness. Mark didn't grovel or beg. He simply waited. The guards tried to move Mark aside, but Cold raised a hand. "Give the boy some respect." His voice, though low, carried a weight that silenced everyone. Mark's breath came out uneven. No one had ever defended him before. Cold studied him for another long moment. "You look like you've had a rough life." Mark gave a faint shrug. "Everyone's got a story, sir. Mine just doesn't have a happy ending yet." For the first time in years, Cold felt something shift inside him, an echo of humility he thought he'd buried beneath years of business wars and boardroom politics. He nodded once. "Get in," he said, gesturing to the limousine. Mark hesitated. "Sir, I can walk." "Really?" Cold's tone softened slightly. "It's not a request." With cautious steps, Mark climbed into the back seat of the car. The leather was soft, the air smelled of expensive cologne and new technology. Screens lined the walls, and faint instrumental music played in the background. Mark felt small, like a stain in a world built for perfection. Amanda sat beside her father, clutching the teddy bear Mark had rescued for her. She smiled at him, and somehow, the car didn't feel quite so intimidating anymore. Cold broke the silence. "How long have you been living on the streets?" Mark hesitated. "A few years, I guess. I left foster care when things got bad." "Bad?" Cold's tone hinted at curiosity. "They cared more about the check than the kids," Mark replied simply. "So I ran. Been doing odd jobs, just trying to make it to the next day." Cold didn't respond immediately. His mind flickered through memories of his own youth, long before he built empires, when his hands still knew the sting of hunger. The car stopped at an intersection. Cold reached into the console and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it on the seat between them. "That's for you," he said. "A token of gratitude." Mark looked at it, confused. "What's this?" "Money," Cold replied bluntly. "Take it. You deserve it." Mark shook his head, pushing it back toward him. "No, sir. I don't want your money." Cold frowned. "You helped my daughter. You've earned it." Mark met his gaze, unshaken. "I didn't do it for money. I did it because she needed help." Cold's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something far rarer, surprise. Very few people ever told him no. Even fewer did it without fear. He leaned back slowly, studying the boy with newfound respect. The city outside blurred past the tinted windows, two worlds colliding in silence. "Finally," Cold said quietly, "you're either foolish, or you have something most men in my world lost a long time ago." Mark frowned slightly. "What's that?" Cold looked out the window. "Integrity." The rest of the ride passed without words. When they finally arrived at the grand gates of the Martins' estate, Mark stared out in awe. The mansion looked like something carved from a dream: sprawling gardens, glass walls, and fountains taller than houses. A guard opened the door, but Mark didn't move. "Thank you for the ride, sir. I'll head back now." Cold turned toward him. "Where will you go?" "Anywhere that's dry," Mark said with a small grin. Cold studied him one last time, then said, "You have nowhere to go, yet you still smile. Strange boy." Mark stepped out, his shoes sinking slightly into the gravel. The guard's eyes followed him as he disappeared into the misty morning. Amanda waved from the window. "Bye, brother Mark." He waved back, warmth flickering through his chest. Inside the mansion, Cold stood in silence for a moment before saying softly to himself, he refused money, in a world where everyone has a price. That night, as he poured himself a glass of scotch, he found himself replaying that line over and over. Something about the boy's defiance reminded him of who he used to be, before the world taught him that compassion was weakness. He didn't know it yet, but Mark Gold had just reignited a piece of his soul. He came from nothing, but that night, a billionaire saw the man money could never buy. Do you think money can ever buy true character? If you believe kindness is richer than gold, hit subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave, where hearts, not wallets, define worth. The gates of the Martins' estate groaned open like the entrance to another world. Mark stood frozen at the edge of the marble driveway, his shoes still caked in mud, his eyes tracing the glowing chandeliers that hung from ceilings taller than any building he'd ever slept under. Every window shimmered with gold light, every corner smelled of wealth, the kind he'd only seen in magazines left behind in subway seats. Cold Martin stood beside him, his tone calm but firm. "You'll stay here for a few days," he said. "Until I'm sure you have somewhere safe to go." Mark blinked, taken aback. "Sir, I can't stay here. This place looks like it charges rent just for breathing." Amanda giggled and tugged on his sleeve. "You have to. Daddy said you can. You saved me, remember?" Cold's gaze softened for a fraction of a second at his daughter's excitement. Then he nodded to his butler. "Prepare a room for him. Something comfortable." The butler's brow creased. "For him, sir." Cold's voice carried steel. "Yes. For him." As the order echoed through the marble hall, Mark's chest tightened. He wasn't used to soft rugs under his feet, or people calling him sir, even sarcastically. Every surface gleamed like crystal. The sound of his old sneakers squeaking across the floor felt like an offense against the architecture itself. Amanda ran ahead, showing him the grand staircase. "That's where Daddy works. And that's the library, it has a secret door." Mark smiled despite his nerves. "A secret door, huh? You sure you're not living in a movie?" She giggled. "Daddy says every big house has secrets." He didn't realize how right she was. The first night was harder than he expected. The bed was too soft. The sheets were too clean. He lay staring at the ceiling, his body restless from years of concrete and cold nights. Every whisper in the hallway made him flinch. Servants passed by his door murmuring, their tones dipped in judgment. "Did you see his shoes? I've seen better on trash day." He doesn't belong here. Mr. Martins is losing his mind. Mark clenched his fists under the blanket. He'd been called worse. But for some reason, hearing it here, in this palace, stung more. Morning came with sunlight dripping through the enormous windows. Amanda burst in wearing her school uniform, her hair in a neat ponytail. "Brother Mark, come see the garden before breakfast." He followed her out reluctantly, only to find the staff watching. One maid snickered as he passed, muttering something about the charity case. When he reached for his jacket later, it was gone. His heart sank. His old jacket, worn, but his only possession, had vanished. He searched frantically until a voice stopped him. "Looking for this?" Cold stood in the doorway, holding the faded jacket in one hand. Behind him, the maid who had been whispering earlier stood pale and trembling. Mark froze. I didn't mean." Cold's gaze hardened. "You didn't do anything wrong. But she did." He turned sharply to the maid. "You think mocking those who've seen harder days makes you better? Pack your things. You're done here." The maid's lips parted in shock. "Sir, I didn't mean." "I built this house from nothing," Cold interrupted. "And I won't have it filled with people who forget where they came from." Silence filled the hall. When she left, Cold handed the jacket to Mark. "This is yours, isn't it?" Mark nodded quietly. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Cold studied him for a moment. "Don't thank me for doing what's right." At dinner that night, the dining room looked like something out of a royal banquet. The table was long enough to need an echo. Silver cutlery lined up in perfect order. 3 forks, 2 knives, a spoon he didn't even recognize. Mark sat stiffly at the edge of his chair, terrified of breaking something worth more than his life. Amanda sat beside him, swinging her legs. "Don't worry, Brother Mark. Just eat. Daddy says food tastes better when you're not scared of it." Cold hid a faint smirk behind his glass of wine. As the meal went on, Mark tried to mimic how the others ate. He used the wrong fork twice, spilled a bit of soup once, and nearly dropped the bread knife. Every mistake made him shrink smaller into the seat. Cold watched him quietly, not with pity, but with something deeper. Memory. He remembered the first time he sat at a dinner like this, decades ago, a poor intern at a wealthy mentor's house. He had made the same mistakes. Used the wrong spoon. Spoken too softly. Been laughed at by people who thought poverty meant ignorance. Cold hadn't thought about that day in years. But watching Mark now, awkward, proud, and painfully human, brought it all back. He set his glass down. "Mark," he said. Mark looked up, startled. "Yes, sir." Cold's tone was neutral, almost reflective. "When I was your age, I was hungry too." Mark blinked. "You?" Cold nodded. "My father was a mechanic. We had nothing. People like you kept me alive, honest people who gave even when they didn't have enough. Don't ever let this place make you feel small." Mark swallowed hard. He wasn't sure what to say. For the first time, he saw not just the billionaire, but the man underneath the suit. Amanda broke the heavy silence with a grin. "Daddy, can Mark come to my school tomorrow?" Cold chuckled softly. "Let's start with breakfast first." Mark laughed, the sound awkward but genuine. For a fleeting moment, he felt normal. Like he wasn't just a visitor in a stranger's paradise. Later that night, standing on the balcony outside his new room, Mark looked down at the glowing city below. The skyline stretched endlessly, each light a dream he never thought he'd touch. He whispered to himself, "I used to look up at these towers from the streets. Now I'm inside one." He didn't know if it was luck, destiny, or something bigger, but for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. He had slept under bridges. Now he dined beside the man who built them. Could you live in a mansion if you felt you didn't belong there? Sparkle subscribe now to the Billionaire's Enclave, because sometimes, the smallest kindness can lead to the biggest miracle. The sun poured softly over the Martins' estate, turning the morning glass walls into gold. In the garden, laughter echoed, bright, free, innocent. Amanda chased Bubbles across the grass while Mark knelt nearby, trying to fix the small robot toy she adored. Its right arm had snapped off, wires exposed like nerves. He squinted at the gears, his fingers careful and patient. "You've been a soldier too long, little guy," he said to the toy, half smiling. "Even heroes break sometimes." Amanda giggled. "Can you fix him, Brother Mark?" He nodded, twisting a screw with a small nail he'd found near the tool shed. "Takes time, but yeah. Everything can be fixed, if someone cares enough to try." Behind them, Cold Martin stood on the balcony, coffee in hand. He watched silently, the way Mark bent low to meet Amanda's eyes, the way she trusted him without question. It was a strange, unfamiliar sight, someone loving his daughter without agenda. No cameras. No contracts. No conditions. By lunchtime, Amanda refused to eat unless Mark joined her at the table. The chef hesitated, looking toward Cold for permission. "Go ahead," Cold said. "He eats." Mark froze mid-step. "Sir, I can eat later." "I don't." Cold cut him off with a firm nod. "Sit, Mark." Amanda beamed, clapping her hands. "See? Daddy said so." Mark sat awkwardly at the edge, unsure how to hold the silverware again. He tried to be invisible, but Amanda kept talking, about school, about her missing mom, about how she wanted to build a robot that could hug people who feel sad. Cold's hand paused over his plate. That one line cut through him deeper than he expected. He studied his daughter, then glanced at Mark. "She doesn't talk like that with anyone else," he murmured, almost to himself. Mark lowered his eyes. "Maybe she just needs someone to listen, sir." The billionaire didn't respond, but something softened in his expression. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Cold's assistant rushed in, holding a tablet. "Sir, you'll want to see this." The headline blazed across the screen. "Homeless teen moves into billionaire's mansion. Savior or scammer?" Cold's jaw tightened. The article was filled with speculation, photos of Mark beside Amanda, twisted into gossip. "Public pity project," one line read. Another sneered, "From streets to silver spoons, how long before the fairy tale ends?" Cold scrolled to the comments. Each one felt colder than the last. "That kid's milking the rich man. Probably staged to boost Martin's image. He'll rob them blind next." Cold closed the tablet with a quiet snap. "So this is what kindness costs these days," he said under his breath. By the next morning, the shareholders had already called an emergency meeting. They filled his office, men in suits, women with tight smiles, voices sharp as knives. "Sir, "This situation is a liability," one began. "It makes the company look sentimental. Investors are nervous." Another chimed in, "Your compassion is admirable, Mr. Martins, but business requires distance. That boy doesn't belong in your home, or in our headlines." Cold sat behind his massive glass desk, unmoving. He looked at their faces, polished, proud, and utterly hollow. Finally, he stood. "You're right," he said calmly. "Business requires distance." The room seemed to relax, until he continued. "But humanity doesn't. He saved my daughter's life. And until any of you can say the same, I suggest you keep quiet about who belongs where." The room fell into stunned silence. That night, Mark sat with Amanda in the study, carefully piecing together the robot's joints. Cold entered quietly, standing at the doorway. "Still working on that thing?" he asked, voice lighter than usual. Mark smiled faintly without looking up. "Almost done. He's been through a lot. But sometimes things just need patience." Cold stepped closer, folding his hands behind his back. "You remind me of someone I used to be," he said. Mark looked up, confused. "Someone like me, sir?" Cold nodded slowly. "Someone who thought the world was too cruel to stay kind. But I learned that when you stop caring, you stop being human." Their eyes met, two men from different worlds, bound by the same truth. Amanda ran in between them, hugging Mark tightly. "Daddy. He fixed it." Cold smiled faintly. "Of course he did." As Mark handed the toy back, the robot's small gears whirred to life, its arms moving again. Amanda squealed, "He's alive." Cold watched her joy and whispered, "So is my faith in people." Later that evening, Mark stood on the balcony again, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. He didn't belong here, he knew that. But for the first time, belonging didn't seem impossible. Inside, Cold watched him through the window. There was something about the boy, something pure in his simplicity, something he feared the world had long forgotten. And in that quiet, Cold realized what Amanda saw in Mark wasn't just safety, it was warmth. The kind of warmth he himself had buried beneath years of wealth and walls. He didn't just save a child, he reminded a father what humanity looked like. Can one act of kindness change even the coldest heart? Tap subscribe if you believe compassion can rewrite destiny, only on the Billionaire's Enclave, where true stories remind us that love is the greatest fortune. The morning began like any other, sunlight dripping through crystal windows, breakfast trays clinking, and laughter echoing faintly from Amanda's room. But by noon, that laughter was gone. Whispers filled the mansion instead. Uneasy, sharp, and poisonous. "Madam's diamond bracelet," one of the maids muttered, eyes darting around. "It's gone." Cold Martin stood at the top of the staircase, his face unreadable as the head of security stepped forward. "Sir, we've searched the West Wing, nothing. But there's one person who's been near the study." Everyone's eyes turned. Mark. He froze, a cup of tea trembling in his hands. "You think I—" The room went quiet. Cold's voice came low and heavy. "We're not accusing, Mark. We just need to be sure." The security chief stepped forward, stern and expressionless. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to search the boys' quarters." Mark's chest tightened. He looked at Amanda, her small face pale with confusion, then back at Cold. "You really think I'd steal from you?" Cold didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than any accusation could. Moments later, the security chief and two guards entered Mark's small guest room. They tore through drawers, checked under his bed, and even ripped open his pillow. Mark stood there, trembling, not from guilt, but from humiliation. When they finished, the chief looked up. "Nothing, sir. He's clean." But the silence that followed didn't heal anything. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes wet but his voice steady. "You didn't find anything because there was nothing to find. But, it doesn't matter, does it? You already made up your minds." Amanda ran to him, tears spilling. "No. Daddy, tell them he didn't do it." Cold's jaw clenched. "Amanda, that's enough." Her sobs broke the air. "He's my brother. He wouldn't steal." Mark knelt, brushing a tear from her cheek. "It's okay, kiddo. Sometimes people see what they're afraid of, not what's true." He stood and turned to Cold, his voice quiet but filled with hurt. You taught me something once, that when you stop caring, you stop being human. Guess I still have a lot to learn about humans. He went to his room, packed his worn backpack, the same one he'd carried when he first arrived, and slung it over his shoulder. The butler tried to stop him, but Mark shook his head. I came with nothing. I'll leave the same way. At the front door, Amanda clung to his hand, sobbing uncontrollably. Please don't go. Please. Mark forced a smile, though his voice cracked. You've got your dad now. You'll be okay. She buried her face in his jacket. But who's gonna fix my robot when it breaks again? He swallowed hard. You will. Just like I fixed it the first time, with care. Cold appeared behind them, his expression rigid, torn between pride and guilt. Mark looked at him one last time. I didn't need your money, sir. Just your trust. Guess that's harder to earn. Without another word, he stepped into the rain. From the window, Cold watched as the boy walked down the long driveway, the same one he had once been driven up with hope in his eyes. Now, those eyes were dimmed by betrayal. Amanda ran to the balcony, screaming his name into the storm. Mark. Come back. But the rain swallowed her voice. Cold's assistant approached quietly. Sir, perhaps we acted too quickly. Cold cut him off. Enough. He turned away, though the guilt burned behind his composed face. The sound of Amanda crying echoed through the halls long after Mark was gone. That night, Cold sat alone in his study, a single light illuminating his desk. He turned the missing bracelet over in his hand, now found, tucked behind a dresser in his late wife's old room. No theft. No crime. Just an oversight. He exhaled deeply, the weight of his mistake sinking in. What have I done? He whispered. Outside, thunder rolled, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the trust he'd just destroyed. Meanwhile, under a bridge across town, Mark sat with his backpack beside him, drenched and shivering. He opened the small box that held the broken gear from Amanda's robot, the one he'd kept as a token of hope. It glimmered faintly under the dim light of a passing car. She believed in me, he muttered. That's gotta count for something. He lay back on the cold ground, staring up at the night sky that refused to shine. For the first time since meeting Amanda, he felt truly alone again. The world that had lifted him high, crushed him twice as hard when trust fell apart. Would you forgive someone who doubted your innocence? Fire, don't miss what happens next. Betrayal is only the beginning. Subscribe and follow the Billionaire's Enclave to witness what redemption really looks like. The rain had stopped, but the night still carried its chill. Beneath the same cracked bridge where his story began, Mark Gold sat hunched beside a dying fire made of cardboard and scraps. The city lights shimmered above him, beautiful, distant, and unreachable. His jacket was still damp from the downpour. In his hands, he held a crumpled sheet of paper, one he had scavenged from an alley bin. With a dull pencil stub, he began to write. Dear Mr. Martins and little Amanda, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I just wanted you to know I never cared about the mansion or the money. I just wanted to feel seen. For once in my life. I'm sorry for leaving like that. Maybe I wasn't meant to stay in places that shine too bright. But tell Amanda, her brother's still cheering for her, even from the shadows. Thank you for giving me something pure, even if it didn't last. He stared at the letter for a long while, then folded it neatly and placed it inside his bag. He wouldn't send it. What was the point? The world didn't listen to people like him. He lay back, gazing up at the bridge above, cracked, cold, and familiar. Guess the streets missed me, he whispered bitterly. Across the city, the Martins' mansion was quieter than usual. The laughter that used to fill the halls had been replaced with tension and guilt. Cold Martin sat in his study, staring blankly at the rain streaking the windows. His assistant entered softly. Sir, dinner's ready. Cold didn't look up. Is Amanda eating? The assistant hesitated. No, sir. She refuses. Cold's eyes flicked upward. Why? She keeps asking for him. He didn't have to ask who him was. He rose slowly and walked to Amanda's room. The sight broke something in him. The little girl lay in bed, pale and sweating, clutching the same teddy bear she'd held the night she got lost. When she saw him, her eyes fluttered open weakly. Daddy. I want Brother Mark. He knelt beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Sweetheart, he's not here. Her lips trembled. Then bring him back. Cold swallowed hard. I will, he promised, though deep down he feared it was too late. The next morning, guilt followed him like a shadow. Every room reminded him of the boy he had judged too quickly. The broken robot on the shelf, the half-eaten sandwich in the guest room trash, the small laughter that once echoed in the halls. Cold sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the missing bracelet that had started it all. It now sat in a glass case, a mocking reminder of his mistake. He muttered to himself, I trusted gold and forgot humanity. Just then, his assistant rushed in, breathless. Sir, you need to see this. Cold frowned. What is it? The assistant placed a small flash drive on his desk. The security system in the West Wing was down that night, but one of the hidden maintenance cameras was still recording. Cold inserted it into his computer. The footage flickered to life. In the dim frame, one of the servants, the same maid who mocked Mark, was seen sneaking into Cold's late wife's study. She opened a jewelry box, slipped out the diamond bracelet, then later staged the search to frame Mark. Cold froze, jaw tightening. The footage ended with her smirking toward the hallway camera. A cold, sinking feeling filled his chest. She did this. The assistant nodded grimly. She's already gone, sir. She resigned the next morning. Cold leaned back in his chair, hands trembling slightly. I failed him. I looked at that boy, and saw what the world told me to see. Not what was real. He walked out to the balcony, overlooking the estate. The wind whipped through his hair as he stared at the sprawling city lights, the same city where a boy was now alone again. Amanda's words echoed in his head, then bring him back. He gripped the railing. I will. For the first time in years, Cold Martins, the man who could buy anything, realized there were still things money couldn't repair. Trust. Innocence. Humanity. Meanwhile, back under the bridge, Mark sat quietly watching the sunrise. For a fleeting moment, the city seemed softer, like it was apologizing. He unfolded the letter one more time, tracing the pencil marks with his finger. His throat tightened as he whispered, if fate's listening, just keep her safe. That's all I want. He tucked the letter back into his bag and stood up. Maybe tomorrow will be different. He didn't know it yet, but redemption was already on its way. The man who owned everything had just realized what, and who, truly mattered. Do you believe fate gives second chances? Subscribe now. You'll want to see how redemption begins on the Billionaire's Enclave, where humanity always finds its way home. The sky was a dull gray that morning, heavy with clouds ready to burst. The streets smelled of rain and smoke, the same streets Mark Gold had learned to survive on. He crouched under a half-broken bridge, holding a loaf of bread he'd bought with his last few coins. A small barefoot boy stood before him, no older than 6, trembling in the cold. Mark tore the bread in half and handed it to him. Eat, he said softly. You need it more than I do. The boy hesitated. But what about you? Mark smiled faintly. I've had worse days. The child smiled through his hunger and ran off. Mark watched him disappear into the rain-soaked alley, unaware that somewhere beyond the fog, destiny was already tracing its steps back toward him. Inside a sleek black limousine cutting through the storm, Cold Martins sat in silence. His driver had spoken twice, and both times he hadn't answered. His mind replayed the footage, Mark's humiliation, Amanda's tears, the stolen jewelry planted to destroy an innocent boy. He couldn't breathe right since that discovery. The guilt felt like a stone pressing against his chest. He stared out the window, watching the world blur into streaks of gray. Faster, he ordered. The driver frowned. Sir, we're entering the lower district. It's flooded. I said faster. The driver nodded and pressed on, tires hissing through puddles as thunder cracked above. At last, the car slowed to a crawl. They had reached the bridge, the same one Amanda had once been found under. Through the streaks of rain on the windshield, Cold saw him, Mark, soaked to the bone, kneeling in the mud as he tied an old blanket around another homeless child. The boy's face was calm. Steady. Gentle. Cold's throat tightened. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. Sir, the driver protested, but Cold ignored him. He walked through the puddles, the downpour drenching his suit, his hair slicked against his forehead. Mark turned, eyes widening in disbelief. "Mr. Martins," he whispered. Cold stopped a few steps away, breath misting in the cold air. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the rain filled the silence between two worlds, wealth and poverty, guilt and grace. Finally, Cold said quietly, "I was wrong." Mark blinked, unsure he heard correctly. Cold stepped closer. "I judged you, without seeing you. I let my pride speak louder than my heart." Mark shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, sir." Cold's expression softened, a rare human smile breaking through the sternness. "You're wrong, Mark. I owe you everything." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, already smudged by the rain. "This is a full scholarship, anywhere you want to study. And a place at my foundation. Not charity, but a second chance." Mark stared at it, then at him. "Why?" Cold's answer came quietly, breaking under the sound of thunder. "Because you gave my daughter hope. Let me give you yours back." Just then, a small voice cried out, "Brother Mark." From the car, Amanda ran out, her pink coat billowing behind her, her teddy bear clutched tightly in one hand. She splashed through puddles and threw herself into Mark's arms. He froze, then wrapped her in a tight hug, unable to stop the tears that finally fell. She looked up at him, smiling through the rain. "Daddy said we're taking you home this time. For real." Cold stood beside them, watching the two with something close to awe. For once, the billionaire didn't see a street boy or a charity case, he saw family. Mark looked up at him, trembling. "You don't have to." Cold shook his head. "Son, I've done enough not having to. This time I want to." The rain softened, turning into a light drizzle. The city lights reflected on the puddles like tiny stars. Cold placed a hand on Mark's shoulder and said, "Get in the car. Amanda's missed her brother long enough." Mark hesitated for only a second, then nodded. As they walked back to the limousine, Amanda held one of Mark's hands and her father's with the other, bridging the distance that had once felt impossible. That night, as the car sped away toward the glowing skyline, Mark stared out the window. The bridge that had been his home disappeared behind them, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning. The boy who had nothing found the family he never thought existed. Can forgiveness rebuild what pride destroyed? Click subscribe. Witness how love, loyalty, and destiny collide next on the Billionaire's Enclave, where every act of kindness writes its own miracle. The city shimmered in gold that morning, skyscrapers glinting under the sunrise, banners fluttering in the wind. The words "The Gold Project" inauguration ceremony hung proudly across a grand stage, surrounded by news cameras, flashing bulbs, and a crowd that stretched into the distance. It had been 1 year since the night under the bridge, the night that changed everything. At the center of it all stood Mark Gold, no longer the scruffy boy in torn clothes but a confident young man in a sleek suit. The world saw him now, not as a homeless teen, but as the heart behind a movement that was changing lives. He clutched a certificate in one hand, top of his class, honors and social impact studies, and smiled as Amanda tugged gently on his sleeve. "Brother Mark," she whispered proudly, "you did it." Mark knelt, smiling back at her. "No, Amanda, we did it." On the stage behind them, Cold Martins adjusted the microphone. The billionaire's once icy tone had softened over the months, replaced by a warmth the public had never seen before. He cleared his throat and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, when I first met Mark, he had nothing, not even a home. But in his heart, he carried something this world desperately needs: humanity." The crowd quieted, listening. "He reminded me," Cold continued, "that wealth means nothing if it can't lift another soul. The Gold Project exists to honor that truth, a foundation that helps young people like Mark rise from the streets to the skyline." Applause erupted. Cameras clicked like thunder. Mark looked down, trying to hold back the tears, but Amanda squeezed his hand and grinned. "It's okay to cry, Brother Mark. Daddy says strong people cry too." He laughed softly, blinking away the emotion. As the applause faded, Cold turned to Mark and handed him a golden plaque engraved with his name. "Mark Gold, founder and inspiration, the Gold Project." The words glimmered beneath the stage lights, reflecting the skyline behind them. Mark stepped forward to the microphone. For a moment, he hesitated. The crowd, thousands of faces, waited. The boy who had once begged for coins now had their full attention. His voice broke slightly as he began. I used to think the world forgot about people like me. But sometimes, the world is just waiting for you to remind it what love looks like. The audience leaned in. Sometimes the poorest hearts, he continued, are the richest in love. The crowd stood and clapped. Tears glistened in a few eyes. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, caught off guard by the sincerity in his words. Amanda climbed onto the podium, hugging Mark's leg. Can I say something? She asked into the mic. The audience chuckled warmly. Cole smiled and gestured for her to continue. She said proudly, when I got lost, Brother Mark found me. He didn't just help me, he helped Daddy too. Because now, Daddy smiles more. Laughter rippled through the crowd, followed by another wave of applause. Cole chuckled softly and whispered to Mark, she's right, you know. Mark smiled, looking out over the sea of faces, then at the city skyline rising in the background. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small beneath it. He belonged there, not as someone forgotten, but as someone reborn. As the event drew to a close, Cole placed a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. You gave my daughter safety, he said quietly, but you gave me something greater, faith in humanity again. Mark turned to him, smiling through tears. And you gave me what I never thought I'd have, a family. The two men, once divided by wealth and circumstance, stood side by side as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The camera zoomed out, the crowd cheering, the banners waving, the lights of the city flickering like stars. From the mansion rooftops to the quiet corners of the slums, people would remember this story, not as a tale of wealth, but as a reminder that love and kindness can rewrite anyone's destiny. He was once invisible to the world, now he had become its brightest story. What's more valuable, wealth or a heart that gives without expecting? Fire if this story touched your spirit. Subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave, where every story reminds us that true wealth begins with the heart. He had no home, no family, no name the world cared to remember. But the night he stopped to help a crying child, destiny finally stopped for him too. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can shake the walls of power. And a boy with nothing can remind a billionaire what it means to be human again. Speech Balloon, tell us in the comments. Do you believe one selfless act can rewrite fate? Red Heart, subscribe to the Billionaire's Enclave, where true worth isn't measured in money, but in the hearts that dare to give when they have nothing left.